Ladies and gentlemen, I think there is an opportunity now just to get a couple of responses to the questions that have been posed. I'm going to facilitate no more than 10 minutes of conversation at this particular panel before I open up to you. So please put your thinking caps on and get ready to engage. Minister, I think there have been a couple of questions that have been leveled directly for your response. In particular, maybe if you can also just start off by giving us a response to what we heard from Professor Pillay, that maybe the National Development Plan is far too inward-looking. Should we not be more proactive? And perhaps what we also hear from Dr. Govender, that we maybe need to interrogate the alignment of economic policy to human rights policy, and whether we can have a seamless line in that regard.
Well, thanks very much, Program Director. Let me just quickly say, as a former teacher, I'd love to listen more. So I'm going to try and be very, very brief. Let me start with the comments by Dr. Prex Govender, and also declare that she's an old friend. Something very interesting. We were together in Parliament when we started in 1994. So we were among the youngest parliamentarians. Let me stop there. I agree fully that the human rights culture comes, or it's embedded in our own constitution. South African constitution is one of the few constitutions in the world that has rights, including economic rights, embedded in the constitution. Even the wisest and the most developed countries, wise leaders, have never fathomed having these rights embedded in the constitution. So that which she defends is which was part of when we developed this constitution. We would want to confirm that development in this country, we must always keep the eye on the ball. Development must always be about our people. You hear voices rising every day in our country about how we must please foreign direct investors. How, if we are not careful, rating agencies will say this and that against us. So I'm sure she will also have a conversation with rating agencies, because we are running a very young country. Water. I was born in a village. I know exactly what you're talking about. Until I was almost 15, I carried a water can for almost 15 kilometers on my head. I would balance it and run and walk. And if you ask me to do it today, I won't. But I've done that. So I know, and I was very excited to hear the Minister of Water Affairs this morning talking about water rights, because that's what needs to change, like yesterday. So we agree. Our growth should focus on inclusive growth if we are to change. And that's why the economy of this, and the trajectory, and the narrative of the economic development in this country. That's why we also emphasize on inclusive growth. This is not the domain of government. It's about all leaders I see in the room and what contribution we make thereof. You said I should also respond to the comments made by Prof. Pillay. I agree fully that our NDP is a living document. It has not to be too insular. That's why we all have to work together to say, as we implement on Chapter 7 of the NDP, how do we make sure that it becomes more open-minded, that it actually responds to our history? That, as I said earlier on, we are a product of our people's struggles, but of international solidarity. Prof. Pillay, I also tried to say that our national interests are not about South Africa, because there are Swazi speakers in Swaziland. There are Basutus who carry documents from other countries, and so on and so on. If I had more time, I would elaborate on that. So international solidarity, it's about the rising global South, Mr. Malik. I just want to take this opportunity once again to thank Professor Anthony Van Niekerk for this very, very wonderful opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Mr. Malik, there's two tensions that I've picked up in the conversation, and maybe you can clarify whether they're imagined in my head or they're not. The one is a tension between the interests of business versus the interests of the people. The second tension is that of national interests versus regional/continental interests. Why are we stuck in terms of seamlessly working through the conversation at that point?
You know, in the 2013 report, we did a lot of empirical analysis and tried to understand why do some countries do better in globalization, why other countries get hurt by it. And all the evidence points to the fact that if you invest in your people and if you invest in infrastructure, you benefit from globalization. If you don't, you get hurt by it. So I think one has to go beyond the standard things of these are the bad people and these are the good people. I think we have to see the context in which forces operate. I think the business has a rightful role to play. We have a civil society which has an important role to play, and we have the government which has to become much more of a developmental state. Mahbub al-Haq, who launched the Human Development Reports, used to paraphrase Abraham Lincoln to say that development has to be for the people, by the people, and of the people. So we have to put people first. And it's not an idle issue. The empirical evidence shows that if you invest in your people, the people take care of the society and of the economy. So actually, they are not opposing issues fundamentally.
Dr. Zondi, let's get you weighing in on this idea that we can position the concept of Ubuntu as a foreign policy guide. Is this something that is, one, realistic, and is this something that is feasible in the South African context?
One of the greatest thinkers that this country has ever had, least recognized, called Achima Feje, says, we don't place on the table the issues that we deal with at any point in our time, but they are imposed on us by the history that we have to respond to in order to chart the EU forward. That says to me that whereas it will be very strange for a European to proclaim their Europeanness and even to proclaim their humanity, it is okay for us to proclaim it because it was denied us. The European does not need to proclaim it because it was never denied them. We have come out of a system whose fundamental logic is to dehumanize. And the character of the state and apartheid, of many things, was to dehumanize, including dehumanizing those who were privileged. The white people were privileged. It was to dehumanize them by making them non-human, but making them superhuman. It is to dehumanize it, to create a false sense of superiority. And it colored the foreign policy outlook of this country, which saw Africa as an empty place to play power games in, rather than as a home for the continent to go. So it is a historical imperative for us to re-insist on that which is actually supposed to be mundane, that we will relate with others on the basis of humanity, because coloniality had embedded the idea of inhumanizing other people, seeing others as subhumans, and acting in a manner that only wants to benefit us as a South Africa, which is why it was very easy for South Africa, without any apartheid South Africa, without any touch of conscience, to invade Lesotho, to invade Botswana, to subvert other countries through the International Cooperation Fund of the time, and all of those kind of things. It was relating with Africa, but it was relating with Africa with a particular outlook that you want to change. That outlook continues in the manner that some of our business relates with the continent. And a lot of countries on the continent have a problem with South Africa, not because official South Africa has a condescending attitude towards Africa, but because the old businesses, the dominant businesses in this country, carry the old attitude of being condescending toward Africa and therefore exporting almost neo-colonial attitude to that, which means that we then have to rehumanize everybody and project a diplomacy of Ubuntu which says we are because you are. Thanks.
Very thorough response there. I'm going to take a final question before I open up to the floor. And Dr. Pillay, I'm going to bring this to you because I think from what we heard from Professor van Niekerk, he called for us to revisit and rethink some of the regional arrangements. In particular, I think he made mentions of SADC and SACO. We heard the minister talking about a call for one-day passes in between the borders, which I guess is a means of speaking to the need for greater simplicity and a greater streamlining and greater movement of people and goods across our borders. Practically speaking, how best can South Africa be a part of moving intra-Africa trade, deepening regional integration, whilst maintaining a position as a meaningful player, one that the minister says does not shy away from challenges, but does not necessarily bulldoze into the sovereignty of other states? How do we balance all of these balls that we need to keep in the air at the same time?
You mustn't ask academics to provide solutions. We're only good at criticizing. I think that one thing we should not do, I think, is create more institutions. The tendency in our country and in our region, if there's a problem, create an institution. Okay? I think we have enough institutions. We have to find a way of making them more effective. So I think definitely not more institutions. I think we have certainly an adequate number of regional groupings, SADC, SACU, the tripartite region, and so on and so forth. I think that South Africa can and must play a leading role without becoming the kind of new neo-colonialist or neo-imperialist, which is always a fear. But I think we have to carry that burden of leading in terms of economic development. But in order to do that, we have to sort out economic policy in South Africa. And I take the minister's point that we made a lot of errors in the 20 years because we were young, we were inexperienced, and we succumbed to international and domestic business pressures. It's time to revisit the policies as Pregs has outlined. And I think that's a fundamental starting point for revitalization of the region and the continent.